Protect your DNA. BioPQQ can promote formation of new mitochondria. Infowarsstore.com.
We are now joined by Jack Posobiec, the White House correspondent with Rebel Media. Jack, all kinds of stuff to talk about right now. Let's talk about what is now a day-old news, which feels like old news, even though it's very relevant still, and some developments in the Seth Rich murder investigation, or lack thereof. I remember us reporting on a lot of cameras in the area, especially in D.C. Cameras everywhere. You'd think there'd be camera evidence. Now you're looking at some of these cameras. Kim.com is looking into some of these cameras. What have you found so far?
Yeah, and I've actually been in communication with Kim, talking about this stuff. We're going through, and I'm actually going to be taking a few days next week and traveling to these businesses, going and talking to these owners in person. We're going to do it on footage for Rebel Media, and we're going to find out if they specifically had information on these cameras or if that information was turned over to the DC police. I actually spoke to the lead detective earlier this morning and turned over the entire list of cameras to him. And it was interesting because some of them sounded like they hadn't been on their list whatsoever. He basically said to me that, okay, I can't comment on, investigations, but I wanted to make sure that they had that evidence. And if there was any evidence out there of what happened, that we could at least get some kind of sense of it. Because even if it was a grainy footage, we could tell so much from that. And I don't want to speculate, but you could tell so much: number of people, size, appearance, whether they had a vehicle or not. There's so much you could tell from just a basic CCTV footage. And believe me, living in DC, there are cameras literally everywhere. So the idea that even with so many businesses around, that nobody has any footage of this whatsoever, very surprising to me.
Yeah, it is surprising that they would not be aware of those cameras or not have looked into that. It sounds like you're going to have some exclusive access there potentially. But yes, you look at the video, and let's remember, it was called a robbery. I think we can tell real soon if this was an attempted robbery or somebody just murdering somebody in the streets. I think that that'll be very present too. And just in your early investigation or early looking into this, have you noticed any blowback, any cooperation, people not wanting to cooperate? What's that been like?
Very much so. You go to a lot of these places and they say, I don't want to talk. I don't want to get involved with this. You get a lot of shut doors in your face. And it's interesting from that. Very specifically, we want to talk to the Lou's Bar, the bar that Seth Rich was in the night before he died. We want to find out, okay, was he drinking? How much was he drinking? Why did he attempt to walk home when he lives over an hour from there? And Uber is all over DC. The bartender there did give a few statements originally to the media, but right now he's not talking. He's not getting involved with anybody. We also did find out, though, that the same guy, the owner of the bar, did visit the White House a few days before this whole thing went happen. So the murder took place on the night of July 9th. This guy was in the White House on July 6th. Got pictures on his Facebook about that we had found. And so it was very interesting. Would love to ask him why. Was it just a tour? What was going on there? Very, very interesting indeed.
Yeah, no doubt. I think that was one of the biggest developments as far as any things that you can look at and just kind of scratch your head and maybe want to go deeper beneath the surface, was the fact that he was at the bar. The owner of that bar was at the White House just days before. Certainly interesting things there. Now, that's somehow old news, even though it's 24 hours old. Now we are into the new news, and that is the fake news. Well, Jack, let's see. It hasn't been but, 5 minutes since Trump has taken off on his extravaganza overseas before New York Times and Washington Post starts spreading fake news. Nut job, the New York Times is saying that Trump called Comey, and it's all over TV. It's all over social media. Can you believe this? You actually have a little insight on how that nut job story started.
I do. So actually, it's funny you mentioned, I was standing with next to the president and the first lady as they boarded Marine One today. I was in the Rose Garden to see them off. They took off from Marine One on this first foreign trip. And then immediately after that, we see this story. Again, another story that's leaked from the meeting, the private meeting that was closed to press from Trump and the Russian foreign minister and the Russian ambassador Kislyak. There were only 3 people in that meeting. 2 of them were Rex Tillerson and I think it was Gary Cohn. And then the third, of course, Rex Tillerson, H.R. McMaster, the national security advisor, and then Dina Powell. Dina Powell, of course, has been accused of leaking classified information before to one of her close friends, who actually is Maggie Haberman. Maggie Haberman, the journalist for the New York Times, that's written some very, very high-level attack pieces on Trump in the past. And we also know that Dina Powell in the past has been very close friends with Valerie Jarrett. Valerie Jarrett, one of the senior advisors to Barack Obama. So suddenly another leak comes from the same meeting that Dina Powell was in. Dina herself saw her at the White House on Tuesday, but she's actually been absent from the White House for the past several days, leading to a lot of people wondering if there's some connection between this Russian leak, again, another Russian leak regarding this quote unquote nut job. And of course, knowing Trump's verbosity, and the fact that the press communications department for the White House isn't really disputing the fact that Trump called Comey a nut job. Certainly sounds like something he would say, but the fact that that information made its way to the New York Times when the meeting itself was closed to Trump's senior staff is very, very interesting. And I think that's the real story here.
Well, it's amazing. I myself didn't take these leaks too seriously. Even when Drudge started pushing it, the leaks becoming a serious issue, I was still kind of like, well, he's going to have leaks. He's going to have people that go to the press. This kind of always happens. But then it just happens more and more and more, and you start to realize he doesn't even have an inner circle that he can trust now. Everything is leaking. He's just on a totally sinking ship, and apparently this is going to lead to some shakeups coming, and I'm curious. I wonder, and I don't know if you know anything about this. I don't think anybody except Donald Trump could know anything about this, what sort of leaks or intelligence he might be putting out intentionally to find the holes, but these holes might be leading to shakeups. What do you know about that?
Definitely. So I know for a fact that Dina Powell is one of the people who's been accused of leaking. One of the people in the past who was accused of leaking was Katie Walsh. Katie Walsh was the chief of staff to Reince Priebus. She was since fired from the White House. She has now moved over sort of to the campaign side. There's also a big shakeup in the works, and that being Sean Spicer. Sean Spicer, the press secretary for the president, reportedly unhappy with his performance, doesn't like how Sean really kind of takes a more defensive tone, and they've been interviewing for replacements. They interviewed Kimberly Guilfoyle of Fox 5, and I actually got the scoop on this, like an exclusive report that Laura Ingraham, the talk show host, was at the White House today for an interview with Reince Priebus.
Yeah, and you've been documenting on Twitter how Sean Spicer has kind of looked pretty down in the dumps. I think it was even you that described him as ghostly looking one day after a meeting with Trump. His body language has been very different.
Yeah, absolutely. And he actually, I think he only gave one press conference this whole week, one or two at that. So the fact that he's been very down, he gave one press conference, but actually refused to allow it to be on camera. So I wasn't really sure what the deal with that was. And just has not been looking himself, has not been looking, his normal. He usually comes out, he's got a pretty good attitude. He's got a smirk on his face. He gets great ratings when he does that sort of back and forth with the press. But for whatever reason this week, he lost that pep in his step when he came out, was looking ashen, was definitely looking like he had either just had a bad meeting, got bad news. And we actually heard on Monday, you could hear from the press. So where I sit in the press room, and I got to explain this to people. The White House, the West Wing, is so incredibly small. It's so incredibly small. So the building, it's the size of like a large restaurant, to put it that way. So we can hear stuff that goes on in Spicer's office. And there was a huge argument going on between him, Steve Bannon, and it sounded like Sarah Huckabee Sanders on Monday.
That's interesting. And Sarah Huckabee Sanders was somebody that I thought did a knockout job when she took over. Nothing against Spicer there. But I'm just curious, with Trump taking off, you're in there with all the media hawks. Have the media hawks been swarming and swirling with Trump taking off? Are they itching for more leaks, itching for more fake news to be brought out?
They want to go after him. They think that since he's gone, Pence, Kellyanne Conway, and Steve Bannon are really the ones sort of managing the shop with Trump in air. Now, of course, he does, the Air Force One is basically the flying mobile Oval Office. So he certainly is in full communication with staff and has a lot of his press staff with him. But they are definitely looking to make sure that he doesn't get any good press out of his trip. He's expected to go over and sign agreements with Saudi Arabia, with Israel, with the Vatican, but they're looking to overshadow all of that with these essentially, these gotcha headlines. So he called James Comey a nut job. I don't think that anybody finds that really surprising, but then they come out.
Yeah, I think Maxine Waters said something similar.
Yeah, exactly. And then we saw with Harvard University, of all people, put out the study today that 93% of mainstream media footage coverage of Trump has been negative. So the bias is clear. They're doing everything they can to make it look like his accomplishments aren't happening and highlight these really basic sort of nothing issues as if it's a big deal.
That's Jack Posobiec, the White House correspondent from Rebel Media, covering everything from Seth Rich to White House leaks to fake news, and it all happens in 24 hours. Thanks, Jack.
Thanks so much.
The reason Infowars Life has 5-star ratings on major third-party sites is because I want products I'm going to use for my family. I take this, my family takes this, and then it funds the operation with the most hardcore, truthful information you're going to find anywhere. So what you find in our news is the same thing you find in our products at InfowarsLife.com.
If I ever forget to take them, I have a noticeable difference. I don't feel good. The nascent iodine is one of the ones that was life-changing for me.
Yeah, I actually have just run out of my super female. I had a few bottles at my house, and I've been taking it again, hitting the gym once again. Very exciting, feeling great, looking good. So, and I know my hair is luxurious once again. So obviously the super female is amazing. I love it.
Nascent iodine is essential. Survival Shield X2. If there's one product that I would say is life-changing that I would suggest, it's Nascent Iodine Survival Shield X2. It's got a 5-star rating.
It's a win-win. InfowarsLife.com.